From the start of this project, my goal has always been to keep it simple. Whether it be the belt-driven chainsaw or the log lift. But I've come to a point where it's efficient enough now that I'm justified in building a live deck. So that's what this episode will be. The motivation for a live deck was probably this elevator that I've had for 3 years and never did anything with. I got it running, did some minor repairs to it, so this is really going to help speed things up. I bought a CNC plasma table before I finished the processor, but never actually put it together because by the time I actually got it, I was at a point where I didn't really need it. So it just sat in a corner. Here I'm cutting out the first parts for the live deck. My dad was down, we did some brainstorming, came up with kind of a path that we were going to move forward with. So here I'm cutting these parts out, and these are the first parts I've cut out on the table. You can't believe how much easier it is when you can do stuff like this with a piece of equipment like this. It just saves so much time. I had welded the brackets on ahead of time off camera. And here I'm just drilling the holes out in the bearing bolts. I sized them to 3/8 in Fusion 360, but didn't realize when you are cutting on a CNC plasma for holes specific to size, you have to oversize them a tad. The drive shaft for this is 1-inch keyed. It's keyed the entire length, but it is 1-inch shaft. All my sprockets are 1-inch drive. I have some hubs that are 1-inch drive for the log flip, I guess you could call it. And then the bearings are the pillow block bearings. They're all 1-inch. The shaft I got was only in 6-foot lengths, so that I just installed a coupler there and then I'll couple the two shafts together. Here I'm doing some measuring and marking for the arms, we'll call it, for the live deck. The arms will be made of 2x3 rectangle tubing that's 3/16 thick. Be in two sections. The first section will be a very short section, and then they're overall 6 feet long, so maybe 22 inches I think it was, and then the rest of it will be a longer piece, and these will be the hinges. The reason the hinges look so weird, I need the arms to fold up, and they have to fold back on themselves because of clearance I have getting the processor in and out of my garage. Most of the processors I looked at commercially, their live decks kind of stood straight up in the air, and I just don't have the height for something like that. So I had to get a little more creative to make it work. So they're going to fold basically back in on themselves and pretty much lay across the top of the processor. Here I'm reaming out some 3/8 schedule 40 pipe that'll basically be part of my hinge. And then I'll use 1/2 inch bolts as the actual pivot part of the hinge. So the 3/8 schedule 40 pipe worked out pretty good. I just had to ream it to size. Here you'll kind of see how the hinge works. Like the slots in the bottom part are to help guide it because I have 2 pivot points. I figured it would just flop around if I didn't have some sort of guide. So at least that's the plan. Here I'm just transferring the holes to the longer piece, which I didn't really think about ahead of time. Since I drew the parts in Fusion 360, I knew all my distances. I could have just indexed and used my DRO to figure out where all my drilling spots were needed to be, but I used transfer punch on the first arm that I built. Here I'm clearancing the pinch points so that the pieces can fold back over on each other, and you can kind of see here how it'll work. Here you can see the arms are going downhill a little bit. I think it was like 2 degrees. Not a big deal. It was kind of a happy mistake. I figured the lower the arms are out at the end, it'll be easier to load it with my little tractor. So I wasn't too concerned about it. I think the chains won't have any issue moving the logs up. And if they do, I'm going to end up putting teeth on them anyways. Here I'm just trying to come up with a plan to mount the hydraulic motor to run the drive shaft. I'm trying to get all my bearings centered up in the openings. There's a lot of play in the holes in the actual bearings themselves, so trying to get them centered up. Getting this shaft in and out of these bearings, it was such a pain. Probably should have not had them bolted down when I tried to move it in and out, but just got to get it in the exact right spot and then it'll go in. But it was such a pain and had to fight with it all the time, and I ended up taking in and out more times than I really should have, but I guess it's just part of the fabrication on the fly process, so. Here I'm just welding some studs in on this C-channel to hold this end bearing. I mean, the end bearing's just support for where the chain drives for off the hydraulic motor. Now I got some parts to design, so I'm measuring these hubs that I got that go on the shaft for the log flippers, what I'm going to call them. Maybe there's a proper name once you see what I cut out to use. But I needed to cut 2 different parts. So I usually only fill my plasma water table once. I try to do all the cutting I can do, and then I drain it out. So here's the brackets out at the legs. Well, they'll house the legs, but go out at the end of the arms. And then the legs will flip up. So that's why there's 2 holes in it, down towards the bottom. Cutting out the log flippers, like I said, I don't know what you want to call them, but this is 1/2-inch plate. The table and the plasma cutter cut this surprisingly well. It was real easy. When I was looking at my leg brackets, I realized I made a huge mistake. I didn't make any way to adjust the chain tension. And I knew I needed to have some way to do that, thinking all this stuff up, and I just didn't think about it when I was drawing these brackets out, and I just ended up putting a single hole. So this was a big mistake. Cost me a bunch of time, and it cost me an end mill, because while I have a mist cooler, I don't have it hooked up. I just have air going through it right now, and it might have saved me. But this is just a 5/8 roughing mill. I got most of the way through, I think everyone but the last plate is when the mill died, or the end of the mill died on me, so I ended up having to take a carbide and clean the last part out, but I got most of the way through all these. It just took me forever to do. Here I'm installing the log flippers. I copied this idea from a couple of the commercial designs. It seemed like a pretty good way to kind of lift the log and push it onto the infeed without any issues. So see how this works out. I'm installing all the keyways for the final assembly. Tighten down all the set screws, stuff like that. Since I got the shaft to the right length, I shouldn't need to take it off anymore. So now it's just a matter of cutting keyways to length, installing them, and tightening everything up. This is about the time I discovered that I never clocked the log lifts. And there's the disappointment. Fortunately, it wasn't that far off, so I think it'll be fine. This is a small C-channel that'll actually be used for the chain guide, and there'll be a plastic wear piece that'll go in between that the chain will actually ride on. This is the wear plastic the chains will be guided on. Just cutting them to width, which will wrap up this episode. So this will be a two-part episode. Next episode, wrap it up. I don't know if I'll get any cutting in the next episode, but I'll at least wrap it up, and then maybe we'll do an episode of it, everything working. If you made it this far, thanks for watching. We're almost to 1,000 subscribers, so please make sure you subscribe, like the video, and I'll see you in the next one.